First of all, I do just want to correct something you said on the air last time I was on your show. You said the government did not permanently increase the money supply. They absolutely did.
Considering how biased the CBC has been toward the Liberals and Mark Carney, it's incredibly satisfying to see them called out live on TV. This was the case recently when Andrew Scheer spoke with CBC's David Cochrane on 2 different occasions where the topic of inflation came up, and Andrew Scheer left Cochrane speechless. Let's take a look.
What the Liberal Party did by dumping a sitting Prime Minister, suspending Parliament, having a rush leadership race with a new leader without really the time for Canadians to get to know, all under the threat of a U.S. Tariffs that dominated the news cycle. I mean, these are conditions that the Liberals should not count on happening again. Whereas our new voters are voting for us because of policies, because they see in our party a solution to the cost of living crisis, to the fact that their communities aren't as safe, the fact that they can't afford to own a home or move out of their parents' basement. So I'm incredibly optimistic about our ability to build off of our gains this time, and I'm optimistic that we'll be able to finish the job in the next election.
Right, but your party may not be able to rely on post-COVID inflation crisis that was fueled by, war in the breadbasket of Europe and supply.
David, you know this. You know that inflation is caused when governments print money.
Well,
that's what the Liberals did. The Liberals flooded the economy with brand new cash. It has nothing to do.
They spent money. They didn't print money. The Bank of Canada did not increase the number of banknotes in circulation in the economy. They used settlement balances.
David,
they used settlement balances to buy government bonds to put liquidity. I'm not being dishonest.
They created money out of thin air. They massively expanded the money supply. You know this.
They did not permanently increase the money supply, Mr. Scheer. But anyway, I don't want to have an argument on monetary policy. They used settlement balances to buy bonds, to lower interest rates, to put liquidity into the banking system, and then they removed those settlement balances over time. So,
are you denying that there is more currency, whether it's digital or real, in the Canadian economy today? Are you denying?
I'm saying they use settlement balances, and you're calling it money for it. There may be a small marginal increase, but it is not the anyway. Everybody had anyway. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was just a couple of days after the election, and still, the CBC is trying to say that the Bank of Canada wasn't printing money. They're saying, well, the Bank of Canada, bought government bonds and things like that, and that's, that's the money that the government used. Well, where do you think the Bank of Canada got that money? It's not just sitting somewhere. They're not just sitting on $600 or $700 billion that's just like literally sitting in a bag in the back room in the Bank of Canada. That's not how this works. And it's amazing how the denialism of the CBC on behalf of the Liberals just takes place here. And kudos to Andrew Scheer. He was not letting David Cochrane get away with it. He's like, no, come on, you're being dishonest. And David's like, I'm not being dishonest. Yes, you absolutely are. Yes, you absolutely are. So what? All of the other countries in the world were increasing the money supply, but Canada somehow wasn't. Is this what you want us to believe? Like we increased our government debt to $1.3 trillion from around $650 odd billion, and that's not increasing the money supply. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? And you know what? Even if the Bank of Canada had this $600 or $700 billion sitting in a bag somewhere in the back room of the Bank of Canada, that money is not in circulation. As soon as they take that money out of that bag and give it to the government, who then puts it into, what's that word, right, circulation, that's going to increase inflation. That is adding to the money supply of the general economy. Money in a bag in the back of the Bank of Canada, and I'm being facetious here, in the back room of the Bank of Canada is not in circulation. But we all know that that's not how this works. They create money, they print money out of thin air, and then that goes to the Government of Canada, and then they put that in circulation, and then that causes massive inflation. This is what happens. Now, the great thing is that Andrew Scheer came back on just recently And he made sure to do his homework while he was away, and he didn't let David Cochrane get away with this.
As Poilievre takes stock outside the House, shifting his focus to winning a seat in Alberta, Andrew Scheer will take on the party's leadership inside the House of Commons. Saskatchewan Conservative MP and newly elected opposition leader Andrew Scheer is here with me in the studio. Mr. Scheer, good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you too.
The new job's a bit like the old job. You've held this role before. I mean, congratulations on it. I mean, how do you plan to approach this in this unusual interim period where you're in this job?
Yeah, thanks very much. First of all, I do just want to correct something you said on the air last time I was on your show. You said the government did not permanently increase the money supply. Mm-hmm. They absolutely did. The money supply is over $700 billion on M2, higher today than it was during the pandemic, and the settlement balances are still significantly higher than pre-lockdown periods. So I just want to put that on the table.
Okay, the Bank of Canada did that, to be clear.
Well, they were buying government bonds because of deficit spending. But anyway.
Okay.
So the look on David Cochrane's face says it all. It's like, oh well, like that's the epitome of an anchor having egg all over his face. Well, yeah. To be clear, that was bank account. Well, where else do you think they're going to get this money, David? Where do you think they're going? Like, sure, the narrative from the Conservatives has been that the Liberals are printing money. And that's effectively true. The narrative from the CBC has been, oh well, they weren't printing money. They had government bonds bought by the Bank of Canada. That's like saying somebody who intentionally opened the bank vault to have someone come and steal the money isn't actually helping the robbery. They're just saying, well, the bank vault just happened to be open. No, this is not how this works. When the government of Canada, and this happens every budget when they go into a deficit, when the government of Canada runs a deficit, doesn't matter if that deficit is 1 billion, 10 billion, or 100 billion, or in this case, 600 or 700 billion. It doesn't matter how big it is. What they do is they then go to the Bank of Canada and they say, hey, Bank of Canada, we need some money. So what does the Bank of Canada do? They magically create the amount of money that the government of Canada needs, and they go into further debt with the Bank of Canada. And then they take that money and then they use it for their budget and they put it into circulation. This is what happened during the whole COVID relief funding. So is the Bank of Canada actually the ones printing money? No, it's the Bank of Canada. But it's the government of Canada that is effectively asking the Bank of Canada to print money. If they weren't running deficits, then the Bank of Canada would not be printing money. This is the same argument that the government actually tried to use in the prorogation trial, if you recall. So the government was trying to say, well, it's not up to the Prime Minister to actually prorogue Parliament. That's up to the Governor General. The Prime Minister just recommends to the Governor General that Parliament be prorogued. So it's actually not on the Prime Minister at all. This has nothing to do with the Prime Minister. And James Manson and the JCCF, their argument was, yes, but for the fact that the Prime Minister recommends prorogation to the Governor General, prorogation would never have happened. And there is never a case where the Governor General does not follow the advice of the Prime Minister to prorogue Parliament. This is the same thing here. When the government runs a deficit, but for the fact that they're running a deficit, does the Bank of Canada print money? That's what this comes down to. So it is complete insanity for David Cochrane and the CBC to try to suggest that no, this was not the government printing money. This was just the Bank of Canada buying bonds with printed money. They are twisting themselves in such a knot to try and carry on even after this ridiculous election, the Liberal narrative that they didn't print any money because they don't want Canadians to remember the cause of all of this crap that we're dealing with right now. That's why.
Okay, so what was the big takeaway, though? Because there was a feedback, and in the early hours after the loss from the caucus when they gather here about I guess what went right, what went wrong, and maybe changes of direction or things you need to stick with. I mean, what's your high-level takeaway from the feedback the caucus presented?
Yeah, you know, I think first and foremost we have to actually look at the data. The data tells the story about what happens. It tells the story of how we had tremendous growth in ridings that we lost by small numbers of votes. So, you know, we lost some seats with 46, 47% of the vote. In most elections, getting 45 and above means you win the seat. It didn't mean that this time. What does that mean for the party? The new math, electoral math, is the NDP permanently in the single digits across the country. In my own province of Saskatchewan, they got less than 8%. This is the birthplace of the CCF and NDP movement. Clearly, counting on the NDP to take 10 to 20% of the vote might not be part of the decision-making going forward. What we aren't going to do is we're not going to listen to people who don't want our party to win to diagnose the problem. We want to meet with candidates who fought. We want to meet with volunteers who are at doors all across the country. We want to hear from them. And we're in the early days of compiling all of that feedback, while at the same time recognizing that to go from 34% to 42% to increase seat counts by over 20 seats and picking up these seats in historic places is a great base to build from. So we don't want to lose anything that we've built, and that's part of the team coming behind Pierre yesterday that we saw, is that everyone believes that Pierre is the guy that can get those missing 3, 4, 5% to put us over the top next time.
And those are some really good points from Andrew Scheer. So caucus did meet the other day. You know, while we can never know exactly what was said inside of caucus, you know, I asked one of the MPs that was in there, I said, how was caucus? And they just said, awesome. So that kind of reflects what Andrew Scheer was saying is, you know, there's some great conversation. They understand that they didn't win the election. They need to make some changes. Some of the changes we've already recommended from our opinion. We'll see what happens. But they're recognizing, okay, so what is the new reality here? Is the NDP dead? Is the NDP going to come back? Nobody knows. So you have to assume that, well, what if the NDP doesn't come back? Okay, so based on that, we need to continue to build. And if that's the case, how do we do that? And I think there is a strong argument to make that Pierre Poilievre is the guy to do that, because he energized this country from coast to coast. You saw that in the rallies. You saw that in the representation. You saw that in where the demographics actually came out. And this is, you know, really, really important. You saw a lot of the unions ignore their union propaganda and come out in favor of Pierre Poilievre. You saw the demographic of the youth come out in favor of Poilievre. Like this is traditionally liberal, right? The general life cycle of politics and people who vote is, you typically vote more progressive the younger you are, and the older you get, and the more you see in the value of money, the more conservative that you actually lean. So this is a completely different ecosystem in terms of politics in Canada right now. And it's because a lot of these young people are seeing and realizing, you know what, these policies that the Liberals have put in over the last 10 years, they have destroyed our ability to actually make a life. They've destroyed our ability to get a job. And we need to work to change that. So very good points by Andrew Scheer here. And it's good that the Conservatives are not, you know, basically drowning in their sorrows, but they are saying, you know what, we've made some good gains here. Let's try and capitalize on the gains that we've made, and let's push forward, because they're not too far from an actual majority in the next government. And let's say the most optimistic scenario happens and the NDP come back even just a little bit, even if they just increase their vote share by 5%, ladies and gentlemen, that's a majority government for the Conservatives in the next election.